The scent of London was the first thing that assaulted Elara Hopkins. It wasn't a single smell, but a layered, chaotic symphony of exhaust fumes from black cabs, the damp, mineral breath of the Thames, the faint, greasy aroma of street food from a vendor down the lane, and underneath it all, the cold, impersonal stone of centuries-old buildings. It was a world away from the singular, comforting chorus of yeast, sugar, and warm flour that had been the perfume of her life in the small coastal town of Seabourn. Elara stood on the cobbled street of Crichton Lane, a picturesque but painfully trendy alley in the heart of Covent Garden. Her fingers, calloused and capable from a lifetime of kneading dough, were clenched around a heavy, old-fashioned key. Before her stood the object of her sudden, bewildering inheritance, the Gilded Bun. The name was etched in flaking gold leaf on a dusty window, behind which sat a few forlorn-looking, rock-hard scones and a Victoria sponge that had seen better days, probably sometime in the previous decade. It was exactly as her great-aunt Beatrice had described in her infrequent, spidery-written letters: small, stubbornly old-fashioned, and, according to the solicitor's grim prognosis, hemorrhaging money. A sharp, rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack drew her attention to the left. Next door, separated only by a narrow, damp-smelling alleyway, was a restaurant that was the Gilded Bun's polar opposite. Silex was its name, spelled in minimalist, backlit steel letters. Its windows were spotless, offering a glimpse into a world of polished concrete, dark wood, and silent, efficient staff in black uniforms. The sound was coming from the open kitchen pass, where a man was chopping herbs with a violent, precise fury. He was tall, with the broad shoulders of someone who commanded his domain, not with bluster, but with an unshakable certainty. His dark hair was swept back, and even from 20 feet away, Elara could see the intensity in his profile, the sharp line of his jaw. He looked up as if sensing her stare. His eyes, a cool, assessing gray, swept over her, taking in her practical, slightly flour-dusted wool coat, her sensible boots, and the wide-eyed uncertainty she knew was plastered on her face. His gaze lingered on the key in her hand for a fraction of a second, and a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips before he turned back to his herbs, the thwack-thwack-thwack resuming with renewed vigor. Elara's cheeks flushed. She felt judged and found wanting by a man who clearly thought a rock-hard scone was a personal insult. Squaring her shoulders, she jammed the key into the lock. It turned with a groan that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the building. The air inside was stale and thick with the ghost of butter and sugar. She fumbled for a light switch, and a single, fly-specked bulb flickered on, illuminating a time capsule. A heavy, marble-topped counter, a cast-iron oven that looked like it belonged in the Industrial Revolution, and shelves of mismatched, floral-patterned china. It was a place of quiet dignity and profound neglect. On the counter, next to a vintage, brass-ringed cash register, lay a note in her aunt's familiar handwriting. "My dear Elara," it began. "If you're reading this, then the old girl is yours. Don't let the glamour of the city fool you. A good bun, made with patience and love, can outshine any fancy foam or gel. Remember the secret. It's in the starter, the one we named Arthur. He's in the cold room, sleeping. Wake him gently. And beware the peacock next door. He's been trying to get his claws on this place for years. He thinks my bakery is a blight on his culinary landscape. Posh twit. Love B." Elara smiled, a tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. Peacock. It was an apt description. She walked to the small, walk-in cold room. There, on a stone slab, was a ceramic crock, covered with a cloth. She lifted it. The smell was sour, yeasty, and profoundly alive. Arthur. The sourdough starter her aunt had nurtured for 50 years. It was the heart of the bakery. As she stood there, in the silent, sleeping bakery, a shadow fell across the dusty window. It was the chef from Silex. He stood for a moment, looking in, his expression unreadable. Then he raised a hand, not in greeting, but with 2 fingers tapping his wrist as if to say, "Time's up." Then he was gone. The next week was a blur of dust, despair, and discovery. Elara cleaned with a ferocity born of grief and determination. She scrubbed the marble, scoured the oven, which, to her amazement, fired up with a roaring, dependable flame and aired out the lingering scent of failure. She made lists, budgets, and more lists. The numbers were grim. The rent for Crichton Lane was astronomical, and the bakery's accounts were a masterclass in sustained loss. Her first attempt to bake was a disaster. She tried to make BA's signature honey oat loaf, but the city water tasted different, the flour from the local supplier was a different protein content, and her own confidence was shaky. The loaves came out dense and sad. It was on the third day, as she was contemplating the cost of a one-way train ticket back to Seabourn, that the peacock strutted in. He didn't knock. The bell above the door, which she had just cleaned, gave a cheerful jingle that was entirely at odds with his entrance. He filled the small space, his presence sucking the oxygen from the room. He was wearing a pristine white chef's jacket, unbuttoned at the neck, and he carried the aura of Silex with him, a faint scent of truffle, reduced wine, and arrogance. "Alistair Stone," he said, his voice a low baritone that didn't invite conversation so much as command it. He extended a hand, but the gesture felt perfunctory. His gaze was already cataloging her improvements with a critical eye. "Elara Hopkins," she replied, wiping her floury hands on her apron before taking his. His grip was firm, cool. "I see you've been busy," he said, his eyes landing on Arthur's crock. "A futile effort, I'm afraid. This location, it demands a certain caliber, a certain vision. And my aunt's vision wasn't up to your standards?" Elara asked, her voice tighter than she intended. Alistair gave a thin, humorless smile. "Your aunt was a lovely, stubborn woman who sold scones to tourists. This is London, Miss Hopkins. This lane is home to 2 Michelin-starred establishments, including my own, and a bespoke jeweler whose clients arrive by private car. A bakery selling," he gestured dismissively at her failed honey oat loaves, "is an anachronism. It devalues the entire street." His words were like physical blows, each one landing on a fresh bruise of her own doubt. "I'm not selling," she said, her chin lifting. "I'm not making an offer yet," he countered smoothly. "I'm offering you a reality check. You will fail. The overheads, the competition, the sheer, unrelenting pace of this city, it will crush this quaint little fantasy of yours. When you are ready to be reasonable, my offer will be generous. I need this space for my expansion. A dedicated patisserie and chocolate studio." He said the words like a priest reciting a sacred text. "Your expansion plans are not my problem," Elara said, turning her back on him to fuss with a bowl, a clear dismissal. "The Gilded Bun is staying open." She heard him sigh, a sound of profound exasperation. "Sentimentality is a poor business model, Miss Hopkins. I'll be seeing you." The bell jingled again, signaling his exit. Elara's shoulders slumped. She looked at the sad loaves on the counter, then at the crock containing Arthur. "Well, Arthur," she whispered, "it's just you and me against the peacock." Failure, Elara decided, was a great teacher. Her first batches of bread were too dense, her pastries too sweet or not sweet enough. She learned to adjust for the hard London water, to find a better flour merchant, to understand the strange, new rhythm of the city. Her first customers were not the trendy clientele of Silex, but the little people Alistair Stone so clearly despised. The delivery drivers, the street cleaners, the shop assistants from the lesser-known boutiques. They trickled in, curious about the new face in the old bakery. There was Mrs. Higgins, a sharp-eyed elderly woman from the flat above the jeweler's, who came in every day at 3 p.m. for a cup of tea and a proper biscuit, none of those fancy macarons. There was Ben, a cycle courier with a seemingly bottomless stomach, who would buy 2 sausage rolls and devour them leaning against his bike, declaring them banging. Elara listened to them. She started making sturdy, flavor-filled pies for the lunch crowd. She perfected BA's recipe for a rich, ginger-spiced parkin cake that Mrs. Higgins declared was almost as good as my mother's. She began to wake Arthur properly, feeding him with a devotion that bordered on religious, and her sourdough loaves transformed from bricks into glorious, crackle-crusted, airy creations with a complex, tangy flavor. She was carving out a tiny, humble niche. The Gilded Bun would never be Silex, but it was becoming something. It was becoming a haven. One rainy Tuesday, a food critic from a respected, mid-tier newspaper stumbled in, seeking shelter from a downpour. He ordered a slice of the parkin and a cup of English breakfast tea. He ate in silence, a thoughtful expression on his face. The next day, a review appeared. It wasn't a full-blown rave, but it was warm, genuine, and full of praise for the unfussy, masterfully executed classics and the astonishingly good sourdough at a welcoming, time-warp bakery in the shadow of the giants. It was a trickle of success, but it felt like a dam had broken. For the next 3 days, there was a queue out the door. Elara worked until her arms ached and her eyes were gritty with fatigue, but her heart sang. She was doing it. She was making Bea proud. The following Monday, Alistair Stone came back. This time, he didn't enter. He stood outside the window of the Gilded Bun, watching the small but steady stream of customers. Elara, flushed and happy from the morning rush, caught his eye. He didn't smirk. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. And for the first time, Elara felt a flicker of something other than animosity towards him. It was the unsettling feeling of being truly seen. The success of the review lit a fire under Alistair Stone. His offers, now delivered via a sleek, black-suited lawyer, became more frequent and more aggressive. The pressure was a constant, low hum in the background of Elara's life. But it also solidified her resolve. She started experimenting, blending Bea's traditional recipes with her own subtle twists, a lavender and white chocolate shortbread, a sourdough with roasted garlic and rosemary that sold out in an hour. The conflict came to a head one Friday evening. Elara was working late, developing a new recipe for a spiced plum and almond tart. The bakery was filled with the warm, sweet scent of baking fruit and nutmeg. Suddenly, a wave of acrid, bitter smoke poured from the ancient oven. A heating element had short-circuited, and a crucial thermostat had failed. The tarts were ruined, and more importantly, her primary oven was dead. Panic seized her. A weekend without an oven was a financial disaster. The repair services she called quoted exorbitant emergency rates and couldn't promise a fix until Monday at the earliest. She sat on the floor amidst the smoke and the smell of burnt sugar and despair, feeling the walls of the city closing in. The door opened, the bell jingling its oblivious tune. It was Alistair. "I saw the smoke," he said, his voice neutral. He surveyed the scene, the blackened tarts, the open, dead oven, Elara with soot on her face and defeat in her posture. "Come to gloat?" she asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. To her astonishment, he didn't. He walked over to the oven, peered inside with a professional eye, and grunted. Classic failure for this model. The thermostat is shot. You'll never get a part for it on a weekend. "I know," she whispered. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint hiss from the still hot metal. "I have a deck oven in my secondary kitchen. It's idle until Monday's prep. You can use it." Elara stared at him, sure she had misheard. "What?" "It's a business proposition, not a charity," he said sharply, his mask of indifference snapping back into place. "You have orders to fill. I have a fully functional, spare oven. You can rent it. For a fee. And you clean up after yourself. My kitchen is a sterile environment." It was a lifeline, thrown from the most unexpected quarter. It was also a deal with the devil. But what choice did she have? "Okay," she said, her voice small. "Thank you." He merely nodded. "Be at the service entrance of Silex at 4 a.m. Don't be late." Entering Silex's kitchen was like walking onto the bridge of a starship. It was all gleaming stainless steel, silent induction hobs, and clinical white light. It was the antithesis of the warm, slightly chaotic, flour-dusted comfort of the Gilded Bun. Elara felt like an intruder, a messy, organic contaminant in this world of pure, controlled science. Alistair was already there, sipping an espresso so dark it looked like crude oil. He wordlessly pointed her towards a vast, intimidating deck oven, then turned to his own station, where he began the meticulous process of clarifying butter. For the first hour, they worked in a tense, unbroken silence. Elara, nervous, started measuring out her flour for the sourdough. She was so focused on not making a mess that she fumbled the bag, sending a cloud of white flour billowing across the pristine steel counter. Alistair froze. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing at the fine white dust defiling his immaculate domain. Elara braced for the explosion. But it didn't come. He simply walked over, fetched a damp cloth, and wiped the counter with slow, precise movements. "Control," he said, his voice low. "It is the foundation of everything. You cannot create excellence from chaos." "Bread is a living thing," Elara retorted, her defensiveness overriding her gratitude. "It needs a little chaos. A little soul." "Soul doesn't pay the bills," he said, but the usual bite was absent from his tone. He watched as she began to mix her dough, her hands moving with an innate, gentle confidence that was so different from his own razor-sharp, aggressive techniques. As the morning wore on, the silence became less hostile, more curious. The scent of Elara's baking, the earthy tang of the sourdough, the sweet, buttery perfume of the pastries, began to mingle with the savory, reduced stocks and fresh coffee of Alistair's world. It was a strange, olfactory truce. He finished his prep and came to stand by the oven, watching as she loaded the loaves. "That's starter," he said, finally breaking the silence. "It's unusual. The flavor profile is deeper than any I've tasted." "His name is Arthur," Elara said, not looking up. "He's 50 years old. My aunt brought him with her from Somerset." Alistair was silent for a moment. 50 years, he repeated, and for the first time, Elara heard something akin to respect in his voice. "That's a legacy." "It is," she said softly. When her bake was done, she meticulously cleaned her station until it shone. As she was packing up to leave, Alistair spoke again. "Your plum tart," he said. "The concept. The spice balance was off. You were using nutmeg alone. Try a touch of cardamom. It will elevate the plums without overpowering them." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even kindness. It was a chef offering a note to another chef. And for Elara, in that moment, it was everything. The broken oven and the strange, shared morning in the kitchen of Silex became a turning point. The outright war between the baker and the chef evolved into a prickly, hesitant détente. Alistair stopped sending lawyers and started making observations. He would sometimes appear at the end of the day, when the bakery was closed, and offer a critique of a new item she had in the window. His feedback was always brutally honest, technically precise, and almost always correct. Elara, in turn, began to see past the Michelin-starred armor. She saw the man who was a slave to his own perfectionism, who worked 16-hour days, who spoke of food not as fuel, but as a form of high art. She learned he had come from nothing, had worked his way up from scrubbing pots in a Parisian basement, and had earned his star through sheer, unrelenting force of will. His desire for her bakery wasn't just greed, it was the relentless, expansionist drive of a self-made man who saw an obstacle to his empire. One evening, he brought her a small plate. On it was a single, perfect caneel. The caramelized crust was dark and glossy, the interior soft and custardy. "Try it," he commanded. She did. It was a revelation. A perfect balance of texture and flavor, simple yet profound. "It's incredible," she said and meant it. He gave a curt nod. "It's nothing. Technique." But she saw a flicker of pleasure in his eyes at her praise. They began a strange, unacknowledged exchange. She would leave a still warm loaf of sourdough at his service entrance. The next day, he would have one of his junior chefs return the basket with a small pot of his own, hand-churned butter, flecked with sea salt. It was a culinary conversation, a dialogue conducted in yeast and cream. Elara found herself thinking about him when she shouldn't. About the intense focus in his gray eyes, about the rare, surprising glimpse of the man beneath the stone facade. She was confused, her feelings a tangled mess of residual anger, growing respect, and an undeniable, frustrating attraction. The climax of this fragile new understanding came with the Crichton Lane Winter Festival, a high-profile local event where each business created a signature offering. It was the talk of the local food scene. For Alistair, it was a platform to showcase Silex's brilliance. For Elara, it was a chance to prove the Gilded Bun belonged. Alistair was creating a complex, deconstructed Black Forest gâteau. A dish of such technical precision it required a team of 3 to assemble. Elara decided on one thing: her spiced plum and almond tart, now perfected with his suggested hint of cardamom. The day of the festival, the lane was thronged with people. Elara's stall was simple but inviting. Alistair's was a theatrical production of liquid nitrogen and delicate plating. He was holding court, the media and food influencers flocking to him. Then, disaster struck. A clumsy server, carrying a tray of Silex's delicate chocolate spirals, tripped and crashed directly into Alistair's station. The painstakingly prepared components of his deconstructed gâteau, the chocolate soil, the cherry gel, the mascarpone cream, splattered across the cobbles in a messy, irredeemable ruin. The crowd gasped. Alistair stood frozen, his face a mask of pure, undiluted horror. All his work, his perfection, his art, was a puddle on the ground. The silence was deafening. The peacock had been grounded. Without a second thought, Elara acted. She grabbed one of her whole plum tarts, a knife, and a stack of plates. She walked over to his decimated station and placed the tart, golden and rustic, right in the center of the mess. "Here," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet. She cut a slice, placed it on a plate, and handed it to the stunned-looking food critic from the Times who had been waiting for Alistair's creation. "Try this. It's made with Arthur." She didn't look at Alistair. She just started serving her tart from his stall, as if it had been the plan all along. The crowd, charmed by the gesture and the simple, beautiful dessert, surged forward. The Gilded Bun's humble plum tart was the unexpected star of the Crichton Lane Winter Festival. Later, when the crowds had dispersed and the lanterns were being taken down, Alistair found her packing up her now empty baskets. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why would you do that? You had your moment. You could have triumphed." Elara looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered vulnerability she had never seen before. "Because we're neighbors," she said simply. "And that's what neighbors do." He stared at her for a long, long time, as if seeing her for the very first time. The arrogance did not return. The man who came to the Gilded Bun the next day was a different Alistair Stone. The armor was off. "I was wrong," he said, standing just inside the doorway. The words seemed foreign on his tongue, but he spoke them clearly. "About the bakery. About your baking. About you." Elara simply waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What you bake, it has a soul. It has heart. It's something I lost a long time ago, chasing stars and technical perfection." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it. "You didn't just save me from humiliation yesterday. You showed me what I've been missing." He walked further into the bakery, his eyes taking in the warm, lived-in space with a new appreciation. "I'm withdrawing my offer to buy the Gilded Bun," he said. "Permanently. In fact." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I have a new proposal. A collaboration." He explained his idea. A weekend brunch service, a joint venture between Silex and the Gilded Bun. He would provide the savory elements, the perfectly poached eggs, the smoked salmon, the artisanal hams. She would provide the breads, the pastries, the scones. They would create a menu that was a dialogue between his precision and her heart, served in the dining room of Silex. "It would be," he said, a genuine, hesitant smile touching his lips for the first time, "the best of both worlds." Elara looked at him, at the brilliant, complicated, humbled man before her, and then at the bakery her aunt had loved so much. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a chance to thrive, to create something new and extraordinary. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it." "Arthur's name goes on the menu. Sourdough by Arthur." Alistair Stone, the Michelin-starred chef, threw back his head and laughed, a real, unreserved sound that filled the bakery with warmth. "Agreed." 6 months later, the Silex and Bun Brunch was the most sought-after reservation in London. Critics raved about the alchemical marriage of high technique and profound soulfulness. The sourdough, served with Alistair's whipped goat's butter and Elara's own strawberry rhubarb jam, was legendary. The Gilded Bun itself was more successful than ever, its ovens now upgraded but its soul intact. Mrs. Higgins still came for her 3 p.m. biscuit, and Ben the cycle courier still devoured his sausage rolls, proud as punch of their bakery. One evening, as Elara was locking up, Alistair emerged from Silex. The lane was quiet, the golden hour light softening the edges of the cobblestones. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe of the Gilded Bun, "I don't think I ever properly thanked you. For the tart. For everything." Elara smiled, slipping the key into her pocket. "You just did." He reached out, his hand, the hand of a chef, scarred and capable, gently brushing a stray fleck of flour from her cheek. The touch was electric. "Elara," he said, his voice soft. "Would you let me take you to dinner? A proper one. Not in my kitchen." She looked up at him, at the man who had been her nemesis and was now her partner, and saw a future she had never dared to imagine, filled with challenge, respect, and the promise of something sweet beginning. "I'd like that," she said. "But just so you know, I'm going to critique the bread basket." Alistair laughed, the sound echoing warmly in the quiet lane. "I would expect nothing less." Under the fading London sky, the baker and the chef finally found their perfect recipe.